tonight.
I would probably say my top three would be Pete, Biden, and Warren.
Decision time as the Democratic presidential candidates race to the finish line in Iowa.
Nobody's made achievements like we've made.
As the president prepares the annual State of the Union address to the nation in the middle of the impeachment trial in the Senate.
Your duty demands that you convict President Trump.
Plus, we have a handful more flights that will be heading to China to bring Americans back home.
The response to the outbreak as the deadly coronavirus spreads across the globe. And
I'm going to Disney World.
The Kansas City Chiefs are champions in their first Super Bowl win in 50 years.
All this and more tonight on Faith Nation. Election 2020 officially underway. Welcome to Faith Nation. I'm Jenna Browder.
Good evening. I'm Eric Phillips. Tonight, Democrats in Iowa will choose who they want to take on President Trump in November.
And the first state primary in what's historically a very important night. Candidates are blitzing the state in a frenzied push to the finish line. All of this as we watch the Senate impeachment trial wrap up in Washington and prepare to see the president give his annual State of the Union speech.
CBN News White House correspondent Ben Kennedy has the latest from the North Lawn, but let's begin in Iowa. CBN News Capitol Hill correspondent Abigail Robertson is in Des Moines, where four candidates are locked in a tight race. Abigail, good evening.
That's right, Eric. And Democrats have taken over the Hawkeye State this weekend, each hosting multiple events and covering hundreds of miles, desperate to win over those final votes and get supporters out to the caucus tonight.
It's going to take some big structural change. You ready for that?
Iowans crammed into events by the thousands to hear directly from candidates one last time ahead of Monday's vote.
Refuse to accept the notion we're going to be in total chaos and war with the other side, because we're done if that's true.
Joe Biden touted his ability to unite while also taking jabs at President Trump.
Speaking of losers, my God.
Many voters told CBN News they're still undecided.
I would probably say my top three would be Pete, Biden, and Warren.
And the night could end with the top four seeing only slight differences in their number of delegates.
In our polling, there's about 5 points that separates the top from the second, and then they're all sort of bunched together. And one of the things we know about the Iowa caucuses is that attitudes of Iowans are pretty fluid. They change pretty fast in those last couple days.
While Senator Bernie Sanders appears to be leading in the state he narrowly lost 4 years ago, pollster David Peterson speculates his 2020 surge may have peaked.
The supporters of those other four top candidates are much more likely to settle amongst each other than they are to switch over to Sanders.
Some moderate Democrats saying they're not quite ready to feel the burn.
I don't believe the Midwest will go for this. You know, Bernie's idea of immediate health care for everybody, when 50% of the country is pretty happy with what they have right now. So I can't imagine that winning.
Or vote Biden back in office.
If it's Biden or Bernie, they're too old. I can't vote for them. I'm sorry.
While others feel unity is the priority.
Yes, I will be behind whoever the candidate will be.
I think it's important that the Democratic Party stay united.
Now tonight, Democrats and their party leadership will get the first glimpse of whether voters are preferring more moderate candidates like Joe Biden and Pete Buttigieg, or if they're leaning towards a more progressive, like Senators Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren. But also here in Iowa, President Trump has sent about 80 surrogates who will also be attending a Republican caucus tonight. Among them are cabinet officials, his children, congressmen, and even his faith advisor, Paula White, who I spoke to this afternoon and asked her what her message is to evangelical voters who maybe like what President Trump has done policy-wise, but haven't been impressed with some of the more colorful language and use of the Lord's name in vain that we've seen these past 3 years. And she told me that this is something that she's had very open conversations with President Trump about. Take a look.
We had a talk the next day, and as you've noticed, he has not used that. That was not his heart. That was not what he meant in any way, but he understands that that can also shut down the ability for somebody to hear him, because that you get stuck right there. And you can see that I think from that last incident, he has not used that. Now, that is in no way to say that he is a perfect man, that he doesn't need the grace of God like the rest of us, or he's not going to. I don't know how he has kept his calm through all that he's gone through and kept his demeanor through much of it. I've watched just some hideous situations. I mean, horrendous. I felt like, you know, just like, I mean, I've watched him when some press would come in being extremely combative and rude, and they can be, but he can't be, you know. And so it's an interesting dynamic that takes a lot of self-control, a lot of discipline, and but absolutely we've had that kind of relationship, and so we talk very openly.
Yeah. She told me that when you compare President Trump with the Democrat candidates who are pushing things like late-term abortion, she believes that there will be once again strong evangelical support for Trump in 2020. Back to you, Eric and Jenna.
Thanks, Abby. And joining us now, Rick Klein, political director of ABC News. Rick, good to see you there in Iowa. Thanks for joining us.
Hey, guys. Good to be with you.
So, Rick, this really looks like Bernie's night to lose. How do you see this playing out?
Yeah, Jenna, it has shaped up that way. I mean, most of the campaigns now say that Bernie Sanders has the strongest chance to win. The Sanders campaign, very confident in its chances. And I think that's going to be a major moment in this primary process. It doesn't win anything for anyone, but it sets the course for the future contest. It shows the strength of Bernie Sanders. And I think a big question is going to be how the others line up. Who is second place? Where does Joe Biden finish in this? I think there's a whole lot of Democrats that are pretty anxious coming into the night of voting in Iowa, that they recognize or they believe that a Bernie Sanders candidacy is not their best shot. So I think you're going to see some different dynamics course through the primary based on the results. And if Sanders wins, there's going to be a lot of Democrats who are going to spend the next couple of days trying to figure out what's next.
Yeah, anxious for a good reason. And you mentioned Joe Biden, the other front runner. He has to be nervous. What would a Sanders win tonight mean for him?
I think the question becomes, Eric, is Biden a close second, or is he a distant fourth or fifth? That's a much different world. I think if he's close, I think you're going to have a whole lot of establishment-minded Democrats rallying behind him to say now it's more imperative than ever that we unite. I think there'd be pressure on other moderates like Pete Buttigieg and Amy Klobuchar to potentially drop out. I think if he drops, though, well beyond third or fourth place and is well off the pace that Bernie Sanders or anyone else sets, people are going to ask about Joe Biden's candidacy and wonder if that's the right path. And maybe it means giving the other candidates another look. Maybe Warren or Buttigieg or even Klobuchar benefit from that. Or maybe it means the Democrats turning their eyes more to Michael Bloomberg, who, as we know, guys, is not doing anything in the first 4 states, but has already been blanketing the airwaves in Super Tuesday states and beyond, spending already $300 million. He is setting records, even though he is not even on the ballot for another month.
Do you think that he could have a shot, given that he's not going to be in some of these first primary states?
No one's ever tried it before. But then again, no one has ever run with $55 billion or so in the bank. He is smashing all of the conventional wisdom by smashing spending records and being literally everywhere in terms of spending. And we know that he's gotten under the president's skin. He seems not to be able to stop talking about him and trying to insult him even during a Super Bowl interview. So I think Bloomberg is going to be standing at the end of this process, and it really depends on what happens. I think if a more establishment Democrat like Joe Biden emerges strong from the first 4 contests, it's hard to see the argument for Mike Bloomberg. If this is a divided party, if there are different winners out of the early states, or if a progressive candidate such as a Bernie Sanders wins and gets a head of steam out of the early states, that's the scenario that Bloomberg's advisors see that he can jump into and to start to put delegates on the board starting on Super Tuesday about a month from now.
And Rick, speaking of Bernie Sanders, is the Democratic Party ready to embrace socialism?
That's a big question for the Democrats. I mean, look, that tag will be used against him. You've heard some Democrats like Joe Biden and John Kerry this week reminding people that technically he isn't even a registered Democrat. He is a democratic socialist. President Trump has already signaled he can't wait to start running against someone that he views as an out-and-out socialist, or as he says, maybe even worse, whatever that means. So I think that's part of the playbook. Look, the party came pretty close to nominating Bernie Sanders last time around. And some people, including people close to President Trump, think he might have been a stronger general election candidate than Hillary Clinton. So I think, as always in politics, you have to be careful what you wish for. But I think there's going to be a lot of people questioning whether that's the right move for the party if Bernie Sanders walks with a nomination.
Rick, just a few seconds left here, but of all of these other candidates, Klobuchar, Buttigieg, Yang, all of these others, after tonight, who needs to bow out?
Well, Jen, I think the pressure is going to be enormous on maybe Pete Buttigieg or maybe Klobuchar if they don't break through. Both of them are Midwesterners. Both of them have made clear this is their major investment. Both of them know that they need a bounce out of Iowa. It's happened before. Look at Barack Obama. But it's very difficult if you don't get a very strong finish out of here if you put so many eggs in this basket.
Rick Klein, political director for ABC News. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, guys. Good to be with you.
Closing arguments began today in President Trump's impeachment trial with a final vote on acquittal or conviction set for Wednesday.
But before that can take place, President Trump will deliver his State of the Union address tomorrow. CBN News White House correspondent Ben Kennedy joins us from the North Lawn with more on that. Ben?
Well, Jenna, Eric, as you guys were just talking about, President Trump is slated to deliver his third State of the Union address just one day before the Senate is expected to acquit him of 2 articles of impeachment. The theme is the Great American Comeback. Trump is expected to tout the strong economy, jobs, and even trade deals. One senior administration official says in his address the president will lay out a vision of relentless optimism. Trump made it very clear that despite what's going on in Capitol Hill a few miles away from here from the White House, he will not postpone the speech.
I'm going to have it. It's going to be done. We're going to talk about the achievements that we've made. Nobody's made achievements like we've made. So many different things. I'm so proud of what we've done for our vets with choice.
Now, it is not clear if the president plans to mention the impeachment trial or even call out Democrats sitting right in front of him in the audience. This will be his first face-to-face meeting with Speaker Nancy Pelosi since House Democrats voted to impeach him. The Senate voted last week 51-49 to deny additional witnesses' testimony in the Senate as lawmakers there picked up closing arguments today.
The president and his agents wielded the powers of the presidency and the full weight of the U.S. government to increase pressure on Ukraine's new president to coerce him to announce 2 sham investigations that would smear his potential election opponent and raise his political standing.
And at the end of the day, the key conclusion, we believe the only conclusion, based on the evidence and based on the articles of impeachment themselves and the Constitution, is that you must vote to acquit the president. At the end of the day, this is an effort to overturn the results of one election and to try to interfere in the coming election that begins today in Iowa.
So bottom line, at this point, it looks like Wednesday at 4 p.m. will be the vote to acquit or convict President Trump. Jenna, Eric?
And of course, all eyes will be watching very closely, Ben. Thank you very much. Now to the latest on the deadly coronavirus outbreak. It is spreading rapidly in hard-hit China, where nearly 3,000 new cases in just the last 24 hours have developed. That brings the total number of confirmed cases in that country to more than 17,000. Plus, the number of virus-related deaths has more than doubled since this time last week to nearly 400. Here in the United States, the number of confirmed cases has now reached 11, all of them involving people who have been to Wuhan, China, which is considered ground zero for the outbreak, or in close proximity to those who have been there. U.S. officials are planning more evacuation flights to get Americans out of China, this amid major flight restrictions there.
We have a handful more flights that will be heading to China to bring Americans back home from Hubei province. We anticipate that they will happen in the next handful of days.
Meanwhile, the Director General of the World Health Organization said a new system is needed for fighting outbreaks, as he stressed the world is, quote, dangerously unprepared for a global pandemic.
Well, coming up, our Faith Nation political panel weighs in. The Hill's Julia Manchester and David Brody are on deck.
Life is better with a good night's sleep. Get your free DVD or booklet of Protect Your Sleep as the world watches from the outside.
It's a big diplomatic tug of war here in the Middle East.
Go inside the story with Jerusalem Dateline.
Israeli archaeologists are talking about a discovery that could change the thinking about the Temple Mount.
Join CBN Jerusalem Bureau Chief Chris Mitchell and get the biblical perspective on the events shaping the world.
What starts in Israel then ends up going to other places.
Watch Jerusalem Dateline Friday night at 9:30 on the CBN News Channel.
Life. It's meant to be lived fully. Jesus said it. I came to give you life. Life to the fullest. Life in your family. Life in your finances. Life in your body, mind, and spirit. Life in your everyday. At CBN.com, we're taking what Jesus said seriously. We're here to help you discover life. Life. Live it fully. CBN.com.
Joining us now for our Faith Nation panel, Julia Manchester, political reporter for The Hill, and of course our very own CBN News chief political analyst David Brody. Thank you very much to both of you for being here.
Yes, Aaron.
We want to begin with today's impeachment proceedings, both sides giving their closing arguments. The question, David, any new ground covered?
No, not at all. I mean, here's an analogy for you. It's like a child, with their parents, and they keep trying to make the argument, and the parents like, look, I've heard enough.
Right.
I've heard enough. Here's the verdict. And both Republicans and Democrats have heard enough. We know what's going to happen, except for, and we'll get to probably this in a moment, exactly how specifically a few outstanding senators will vote. But we know that this cake is baked at this point.
Well, David, you kind of hit on that, but do you think any of the Democrats will actually vote to acquit President Trump?
Well, we're looking at Doug Jones potentially in Alabama, Joe Manchin in West Virginia, specifically Doug Jones. He's got an election coming up, and I think that'll be the interesting one to watch.
Julia, how much do you think this impeachment situation is affecting Iowa or is going to affect Iowa?
I don't think it will affect Iowa that much because we know that all of the Democratic candidates have come out in favor of impeachment. They've addressed it, they answer questions about it, and then they move on. However, we are seeing that those 3 or 4 senators, if you count Michael Bennet, who's been trailing in the polls, Senator Sanders, Warren, and Klobuchar, have been away in Washington. However, I had colleagues on the ground in Iowa this week who said that Sanders, Warren, Buttigieg events, Sanders, Warren, and Klobuchar events have really been packed. And we know that Sanders in particular has a 4-year-old organization in Iowa, and polls show him leading. So this isn't his campaign's first rodeo when it comes to caucusing. So I think they're feeling pretty good about themselves tonight.
Now, let's talk about the State of the Union address tomorrow night. The president saying that it'll be a pretty positive speech, not necessarily focused on impeachment. Julia, what do you anticipate tomorrow night?
I think President Trump is really going to tout his economic accomplishments, economic growth under his administration, the passage of the USMCA trade bill that was a campaign promise that he would renegotiate NAFTA, and the killing of Qasem Soleimani, that top Iranian general. He's going to focus on that. But I just want everyone to imagine the optics of this. Nancy Pelosi will be sitting to the left-hand shoulder of the president, or the right-hand shoulder. I'm trying to picture it in my head. But yeah, it'll be a very tension-filled room for sure.
Do you think we'll get another Pelosi clap?
That's potentially. You never know. I think there will be a viral moment for sure, though.
There could be some gifts coming out of tomorrow night. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, David, do you think there will be a victory lap happening tomorrow night for the president? Will he use his opportunity to take a victory lap for what will happen on Wednesday?
No, I don't think specifically on impeachment. He'll take the victory lap on this economy that we see going on and a lot of other things. I think it's going to be a bit underhanded. I don't think we're going to hear him say, you bunch of Democrats, we're not going to see Twitter tomorrow night at the State of the Union. I do think the media and all of us will dissect some of kind of the underhanded, verbiage that comes from him that kind of is pointed towards Democrats about this.
What is the bet that he'll go off script?
No, I tell you what, State of the Union, he's 90-10 on State of the Union.
Yeah.
All right, maybe 85-15.
All right, Julia and David, thank you both.
Thank you.
Thanks.
On October 1st, 1961, history was made when a tiny station began transmitting the first signals of the Christian Broadcasting Network.
CBN, the Christian Broadcasting Network.
And now, a new era has begun with the all-new CBN News Channel.
Just moments ago, the Iron Dome intercepted an incoming rocket right on the Gaza border.
Administering in this area, spiritual warfare is definitely involved.
A 24/7 news network, bringing you the news you want from a source you can trust.
In Kenya, 40% of the medical services are actually provided by these Christian hospitals.
Let's talk about the economy.
Believers here are joining together to win people to Jesus Christ.
All your favorite shows now in one place. Go to CBNNewsChannel.com to find out how to get the CBN News Channel on your TV all day, every day. CBN News. Life is better with a good night's sleep. Get your free DVD or booklet of Protect Your Sleep today.
Life. It's meant to be lived fully. Jesus said it. I came to give you life. Life to the fullest. Life in your family. Life in your finances. Life in your body, mind, and spirit. Life in your everyday. At CBN.com, we're taking what Jesus said seriously. We're here to help you discover life. Life. Live it fully. CBN.com.
Democrats on Twitter are more liberal and less likely to find common ground than those who do not tweet.
That is the finding from a new Pew Research Center survey out today. A 56% majority of Democrats and Democrat-leaning independents on Twitter say they are liberal or very liberal compared to Democrats who are not on Twitter. 29% of Democrats on Twitter are less likely to back a candidate who seeks common ground with Republicans. And joining us now to help us break down this new survey from the Pew Research Center is Adam Hughes, the Associate Director of Data Labs at Pew Research Center. And thank you very much for joining us today. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Well, first off, you all have done a number of these studies in general. Are you seeing deepening political divides among those who you're surveying?
Well, I guess you could say there's a deeper divide perhaps among Twitter users than among all Americans, or certainly among Americans who don't use Twitter. And that's kind of reflected in the finding that those who are on Twitter are less interested in choosing a candidate who prioritizes finding common ground. And this is among Democrats.
Why did you all decide to do this study? What kind of made you want to do this?
Sure. I guess Twitter seems like it's politically relevant right now. President Trump has been obviously tweeting a lot of sort of major policy actions are announced on Twitter. And so we think it's an interesting resource for understanding political dynamics. Now, the other reason that we're focused on Americans using Twitter is that we have a large panel of folks who take surveys regularly. And some of those folks actually gave us access to their Twitter data. So we can combine what they're saying in the survey with what they're tweeting about. And that gives us a really unique perspective on how Twitter and politics plays out.
Do you think social media in general, and specifically Twitter, makes it easier for people to hold more liberal views and to not be as willing to compromise?
It's a really interesting question, and I don't know that our data really speak to it because we don't really observe the same person over time changing their behavior yet, although by creating sort of this foundation for that research, we might know that in the future.
Well, now the Iowa caucuses are tonight, which means that Americans will begin voting for the first time as the 2020 presidential election process grows closer and grows on. do you think that when it comes to Twitter users and to those who don't use Twitter, will it really affect which candidate they support?
You know, it's interesting. We find that Twitter users, Democrats on Twitter, are much less likely to support Joe Biden. And that's true whether you're looking at all Democrats, you're looking at registered Democrats, and even those who aren't sure if they're registered.
Those who don't use Twitter?
So those who use Twitter are less supportive of Biden.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, and we see sort of the opposite pattern unfolding with Warren and Sanders, where the Twitter users are much more likely to support those candidates. And maybe that's related to sort of how liberal the Democrats are. But it's definitely the case that the conversation on Twitter is taking place among folks that have different candidate preferences than among Democrats who don't use the site.
Do you think this kind of do you think Twitter can influence people to skew in a certain direction or not, or are they already there and that just happens to be the people who are on Twitter?
Yeah, again, it's something that we'd want to look at over time to sort of see what people are exposed to and how that affects their opinions. But that said, one interesting finding from an earlier study that we did showed that a small number of folks really created the vast majority of the tweets that talked about national politics. So if that is the case, it's a small number of people kind of shaping the political conversation among U.S. adults, and that might have implications too.
All right, Adam Hughes with the Data Labs at Pew Research. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And we'll be right back.
Life is better with a good night's sleep. Get your free DVD or booklet of Protect Your Sleep today.
I'm Ephraim Graham, and this is Studio 5. Cruise with me as I discover the good things happening in the world of music, sports, television, and movies.
The fact that Ryan Coogler was going to be directing the film, I knew that something special was going to happen.
We'll chat with artists at the forefront of entertainment and explore the connection between popular culture and faith.
I asked my pastor, I said, well, does that mean I'm supposed to be a preacher? He says, well, no, you already have a pulpit.
Watch Studio 5 Wednesday night at 9:30.
Remember for a moment what it was like to be a child. You believed every story you were told. You saw a world full of endless possibilities. What stories will the world's orphaned and at-risk children believe? We believe the Bible tells the only story truly worth believing. We believe that every child should have the opportunity to dream, the chance to take challenges and turn them into possibilities, the chance to stand on the promises of God, to recognize their place in the greatest story ever told. They have their whole lives ahead of them. Theirs is a world of endless possibilities. They are looking for a story to believe. We will tell them that story. Will you join us?
And finally tonight, after a 50-year drought, the Kansas City Chiefs are your new Super Bowl champs.
Yeah, a lot of people in the Midwest very happy. When a close-fought, back-and-forth game, the Chiefs defeated the San Francisco 49ers 31-20.
Something I've wanted to say my whole life. I'm going to Disney World.
Can I go with you?
Yeah, everybody's invited.
And the Chiefs' 24-year-old quarterback Patrick Mahomes became the youngest player ever to win both regular season and Super Bowl MVP accolades. Mahomes and his Legion of Zoom lit up the field late in the second half, scoring 3 touchdowns in the fourth quarter, overcoming a 10-point deficit to take home the trophy.
And Mahomes also credited his faith as being able to help him win as well.
So neat to see.
Yeah.
All
We'll
right.
be back tomorrow night.
Have a good one.